This is Vanessa Urena, and I'm really excited to announce my new store, Sword and Scythe, where I will be offering magical art, materia, and services beneath Mars and Saturn. You can visit the store at swordandscythe.com and be sure to sign up for the email list to receive early access to new releases.
Speak the charm of me.
There will come a time on the planet Earth when science and technology will be long forgotten, when wizards will rule the world.
This is the Arnemancy Podcast. The world is weirder than we know. Join your host, Reverend Eric, and his diverse array of amazing guests in an exploration of tarot, magic, the occult, and the history of Western esotericism. The Arnemancy Podcast exists thanks to the support of generous listeners like you. Please consider supporting this podcast for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/Arnemancy. Welcome back to the Arnemancy Podcast. This is Reverend Eric, and my guest today, not my host, I'm the host. My guest today is Heather Freeman, a professor of digital media at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and the host of the fairly new podcast, Magic in the United States, which is available now from PRX, wherever you get your podcasts, or most of the places you get your podcasts. Heather, welcome back to the show to talk about another awesome project that you are working on.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me back, Eric. And I have to say two things. One, you are one of my favorite podcast voices. I need this to be on public record. And okay. Two, happy belated birthday.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm trying to grow old gracefully, and it's I feel like there's some sort of grace dignity trade-off, and I might be doing poorly on both of them.
Oh, just go full board, like ditch the dignity. It makes it so much easier.
Ditch the dignity, just go for the grace.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So before we talk, okay, yeah, grace. That sounds like a theological question. We'll get to that later.
It's another episode, yeah.
Yeah. So the last time I talked to you on this podcast, you had just finished Familiar Shapes, or you had just released Familiar Shapes as a podcast. And since then, I just learned that there was a short animated film version of Familiar Shapes that came out, and I never knew about it. I haven't seen it yet. I'm really excited to watch it. Is it sort of, what's the style? Could you give me some...
Yeah, it is definitely it's fine. I'm not going to say anything bad about it. It's about 20 minutes. It's a mix of live action and animation. And this was the thing. This was
is
going to
it like
be that
Roger Rabbit mix is like,
oh gosh, I wish. Oh, that would be so rad. Now I have to remake it. No, yeah. It's more, interspersed. So I had students, UNC Charlotte students who were interning on it, actually. And so they got to develop their skills as animators, animating certain scenes from it. So there's several different animation styles, which is one of the reasons why I probably didn't do well on the film festival circuit. And the video footage is a combination of interviews with folks like, Daniel Harms, who's back for this podcast, and Ronald Hutton, and also some footage shot by a colleague of mine, Hamilton Ward, who's an independent filmmaker, does amazing films. So he was kind enough to lend some of his filmmaking expertise.
That's cool.
It's the 20-minute version of a 21-episode podcast series.
Yeah, but I mean, when you made, but like, the thing about Familiar Shapes is that you made it to be a film. So it's great that you got to use some of the footage after all. You know, that like all of these nerds that you drug out of the dust that all combed their hair and stuff, like it didn't go to waste.
Yeah. I mean,
that's excellent.
Yeah, I thought so, but I'm glad. I'll share it with you.
Okay. So, magic in the United States.
Yeah.
So, what do you mean by magic?
Oh gosh, it's so funny. Every scholar I've interviewed, at some point I ask them, I'm like, can you define? And they just cut me off. They're like, please don't make me define magic. Please. And I'm like, no, we're going to do it anyway. Yeah. And it's, as we've worked on this podcast series, I've realized that one of the key questions in this whole series is, why are we even trying to define it? Like, what is it about it that's so nebulous, that's so hard to define, which is fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I did a whole episode about trying to define magic when I
love that episode, by the way.
Man, that was a tough episode because nobody agrees. I think when I try to describe it to people, it kind of depends on who they are, right? Like I'll be like, what sort of definition is this person ready to accept? So sometimes I'll just pull out a bunch of big words and I'll call it like transgressive, marginalized religious practice. And then people are like, what?
Oh, that's not wrong. Oh, I kind of like that.
It is, but it's also not right.
Yeah, I mean, so there's multiple parts to that question. It's like this messed up Venn diagram, right? Like there's who's answering it. There's who asked the question to begin with. There's who's listening in. And then there's also, the person who's trying to answer it. In the act of trying to answer that question, you're probably messing with your own practice if you're a practitioner in some way, shape, or form. Like, what spirits am I miffing right now? And one of the things that really came up in this podcast is that that application of the word magic often is so contextual to the individual's class, race, gender. So
and the moment, right? And
yeah,
also...
and the moment. Yeah, absolutely. So like even calling this whole podcast series Magic in the United States, so many of the historians, when I've asked them to let me interview them about things, they have to stop me and they're like, okay, I need to let you know that like calling this practice magic is racist. And I was like, yes, that's exactly why we're tucking into this, because people do that. They call it magic. And then you do have practitioners who are very comfortable being wobbly with when they call it magic and when they call it a spiritual practice or a folk practice. And so it really starts to dial down, not to the practice, but to the individual practitioner. And I think that's so, so important, but it makes it really tricky and kind of dangerous territory to try to navigate.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I guess I was just sort of thinking about like, there are practices where calling it magic is racist, but they're also, it's almost, I don't know, I guess in a way, magic deals with such marginalized practices sometimes, and frequently they're marginalized because of economic class or just like population, like demographics, right? Like, not very many people know about like African traditional religions, ATRs, right?
Yeah,
so
African
calling them
religion.
magic, I mean, there just aren't very many practitioners of it.
Right. Or
compared to like Southern Baptists.
Right. No, exactly. And I think, part of that too is that our understanding of what we call magic, we meaning other magical practitioners, right? Like people who work in Western esotericism or things that sort of branch off from that. The very fact that we're using that word magic and we're comfortable with it is probably a pretty recent phenomena. If we went back to Agrippa, right?
Yeah. Well, he spent a lot of time trying to define what magic was when he wrote about it.
Right.
Because he knew that it was considered a bad word for him.
Yeah. And it's one of the reasons why that 3 books is still like, it always strikes me as revolutionary compared to other grimoires. So I think that conception of magic is something that we embrace and that we're actively using that word deliberately to describe what it is we're doing, rather than folk healing or rather than I don't know.
Folk healing to me, like the term folk healing sounds so dismissive and diminutive to me.
Yeah.
Right? Like those are magical traditions that like it's almost it's I don't know, it just sounds ridiculously classist. Like it's just sort of like, oh no, that's not magic, that's folk healing.
But that's also in part because we have elevated magic to this sort of noble pursuit. I mean, it's the pursuit of gnosis in a lot of ways. It's that whole thaumaturgy versus theurgy debate, right? And at the end of the day, I think most of us are like, there's not really a meaningful distinction between, say, high magic and low magic, right? Those are sort of categories that were invented to try to accomplish certain things, but they don't really have a lot of practical use to contemporary practitioners living in the United States right now, working with grimoires or 20th century practices or whatever. That was one of the things that was really interesting to me in which episode was it? Now I'm losing track of my episodes. The third episode, the powwow episode.
I haven't listened to that. I'm so excited to listen to that one. Powwow is one of my favorite topics. I know so little about it, and I enjoy everything I learn. So.
Oh, okay. I hope you like it. I learned a ton working on that one. I mean, I learned so much. But yeah, it's there's two practitioners in it. And one of them is like, nope, these are prescriptions. This is a healing practice. He's very uncomfortable using the word magic to describe it. So when I was interviewing with him, each practitioner, I don't make assumptions about how they're going to define their own practices. I let them sort of set out the groundwork for it, and then I use their own language in that. But then another practitioner I interviewed was like, yeah, it's folk healing and it's folk magic, but it's magic, So going back and forth between these two practitioners who both practice powwow and are using sort of different terminology, but are clearly definitely talking about the same thing. Like they actually reference the same prescriptions from The Long Lost Friend, which was kind of amazing to me. That didn't make it into the final edit, but I love that. That tension is so fascinating to me. And I think it's okay to not have a clear answer. I think it's okay for the definition of magic to be nebulous and ever morphing for the individual. Rock on, say I.
Okay. I mean, you're the professor of digital media.
Yeah, but I'm not a doctor. So real doctors can tell me.
Hold on. You don't have to be a doctor to be a professor. You don't have a PhD?
Master's is the terminal degree in the arts right now still.
Oh.
Yeah.
What about Hunter S. Thompson? He had like
I think creative writers. I don't know. Gerald Gardner had a doctorate. I mean, look at him. He's fine.
Well, he had the hair. Okay, so let's. So when you talk about magic in the United States, like you're sort of exploring its history, right? How far back are you going?
Oh, yeah. No, this is really hard because this was one of the first questions is how are we defining this? So really early on when I was actually writing the grant, we were like, are we defining this as like the United States, like post Constitutional Convention? Is this like all of North America? What do we do with Central and South America? And really, we've been a little arbitrary. We're sort of looking at the geographic landmass that is today the United States and territories, whatnot. But like, but that's kind of it. So we're keeping that time frame kind of wide open because there are some really interesting things that happened between some of the indigenous populations and Spanish missionaries, which might or might not make it to an episode. We're sort of still looking at that, but we're being a little nebulous about the front end. But we're going up to the present day. So
okay,
I really want to Oh, go ahead.
Give me an example. So like one of the articles that I read said that you were looking at stuff that was happening back in the 1600s.
Yeah.
So I assume you're going to have an article about like the Salem witch trials and stuff.
It's funny. I've sort of been on the fence about the Salem witch trials. I feel like there's so many other podcast episodes about that. And some are, more historically up to date than others in terms of what current research is. And it's not necessarily actually the most interesting witch trial. One of the first witch trials that happened in the United States was overseen by William Penn. And basically, there was a woman who was accused of witchcraft. I believe she was German speaking, but I'm not 100% sure of that. And she didn't really understand what was going on in the trial. Like she was really kind of confused. And then William Penn is basically like, well, can you fly on a broom or not? And she basically couldn't really answer the question. And then he sort of says, well, actually, it doesn't matter because there's not actually a law against flying on the brooms. So you're fine. There's no crime here. And he let her go, which like at that time, I mean, that's kind of radical, if you think about it. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, William Penn was in the 1600s. And I mean, Europe was super busy burning witches during that period of time.
And we were, inheriting some of the disinfo, misinfo campaign from that slowly.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I mean, honestly, things like sort of echoes of the Satanic Panic are kind of more interesting to me in terms of that sort of moral panic, and how that manifests. And that happens all the time,
So then what are some of the earliest things that you've covered so far? Like, I don't know how far ahead your production is. I don't know how. So like, you have a grant. You're doing this as sort of a professional project sort of thing. You've got like a team and stuff. I don't really understand how all that works. Do you get to boss people around?
No, my job
like,
is
more cowbell.
Yeah, it's like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, and then 10 people tell me like, yeah, no, that's not amazing. So then I revise it. So it's actually the best kind of creative practice. I have about a dozen humanities advisors who are different scholars from different disciplines. Some of them are also practitioners, not all of them. And I sort of run drafts of things by them to make sure that I'm not like way off in left field or that I'm missing some important thing. And then I have the team from PRX who, honestly, Lucy Perkins, my editor, if it weren't for her, every episode would be such a steaming pile of mess. Well, okay. And then Jenny Cataldo's amazing sound design and amazing mixing. So between the two of them, and then Amber Walker, who like is our producer, who keeps all the cats herded, and then Nor Gill, who was like amazing at like wrangling all these guests. Like everybody has had such a massive role in this. Mine is basically doing the research to figure out what are we even going to do an episode about, learn enough about it to be dangerously ignorant, find people to interview those people who hopefully get me past my dangerous ignorance, and then these sort of cycles of edits and revisions and reviews to like kind of cull it down to that whatever that core content is that we really want primarily a generalist audience to know.
Yeah. It's
my love song to these communities. It is for sure. But it is, because it's my love song to the communities, it's targeting non-community audiences to basically be like, hey, these are things that happen and they're kind of part of our intangible cultural heritage. And that's amazing.
Yeah. That sounds like an incredible process. And I am envious that you get to be part of something like that. That sounds really cool.
It's a dream.
I mean, I've done a few highly produced episodes myself, and it is as one person doing it, it's just such a huge, enormous amount of work. Like, the back end, the editing end, you spend like 10 hours on like half an hour of audio. And then on the front end, the writing and the research and the everything. That sounds really cool.
No, it's one of the things that I love about your Agrippa series. Like, I feel like your series on Agrippa is like exactly the audio cliff notes that I kind of needed, that I didn't know I needed, to really kind of revisit T-Bop, T-Boop, T-Boop.
Well, thank you. I feel like it ended up being so much work that, I did 9 episodes, but I probably should have done like 18. I just couldn't take that much time.
No, it takes forever. Yeah.
Okay. So anyhow, back to my question before I distracted myself. What's some of the old material? What are some of the older stories or older topics that you're going to be tackling?
Okay. Well, in this season 1, the oldest one is probably, it's definitely the one on hoodoo root work conjure. So because hoodoo root work and conjure, it emerges from the practices of enslaved Africans as they became African-Americans, and it's like uniquely this American practice because it was this bricolage of Central and West African practices with European practices, and then also indigenous Native American practices. So that episode, it starts in the Americas, but it really, sort of historically, you kind of have to look back to practices that go, much further past the European colonization of America.
Was that difficult to research? I assume that most of the early material on that was probably either all oral or were lost frequently, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, there's actually some amazing scholarship out. Yvonne Chareau wrote this amazing book called Black Magic, and it, like, anybody who's interested in understanding the history, I think honestly, as somebody who lives in North Carolina, I think everybody especially in the South, should be familiar with the cultural heritage and the history of hoodoo rootwork conjure. Just that is part of the history of this land that we live upon. But Yvonne Chareau's book Black Magic is astounding. It's so well researched. It's so insightful, and it was just such a gift to get to talk with her on that episode. So there's actually quite a lot that's known. The thing that was really hard about that is I am not a hoodoo rootwork conjure practitioner. I'm white as the day is long. I am like second generation academic. I'm upper middle class. I have an advanced degree. Like, I am not the person who should be telling that story. And I was extraordinarily conscious of that the whole time.
Right.
And I talked with some friends about it because I was like, I am really not the person to be telling the story. And they were like, well, maybe ideally this podcast becomes the doorway through which that story is getting told by other podcasters, by the way. Like, there are other people doing that amazing storytelling. So hopefully, like, this podcast will help sort of expose those stories to broader audiences so people can know these amazing parts of our history.
Yeah, yeah.
That was the thing that was hard about that episode more than anything else.
So one of the really interesting things, though, about that kind of practice, like, the hoodoo rootwork stuff is like definitely fits also into that category of folk magic. It's sort of magic. Maybe I don't know if desperation isn't really the right word. It's magic done out of need by people who are either disenfranchised or have no other recourse, like no access to doctors, no access to medicine, no access to money, no access to
legal
anything
defense,
that they would to legal defense, to anything that they would really need to succeed. And you see that kind of folk magic in American history pop up, in the Braucherei powwow tradition, and then in like Appalachian folk magic, and like, how far west have you seen this stuff happening?
How far west? Oh wait, I have to think directional.
Like when we get into the 19th century, as colonizers spread more and more west.
I see.
How does the folk magic follow? Like, is there a separate folk magic tradition in Minnesota? Like,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the thing. So I'm actively right now. I mean, I have drafts for ideas for episodes for season 2 and 3, but there really is so much. And some of it, there's tons of research on it, and it's really easy to find it. Others, it's not that the research isn't there. It's just not as publicized. Academia has its own implicit biases, right? So
Right.
magic is definitely one of them.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a thing. But also, I mean, one of the things that's really evident throughout the history of magical practice in the U.S. is that it is a remix. It is a bricolage. So, for instance, hoodoo rootwork conjure is this beautifully bricolaged practice. And as powwow later in the 1800s starts to emerge in the Pennsylvania Dutch area, it moves south, right? And then as the first Great Migration happens, right, African Americans bring rootwork conjure with them up north. This mixes with powwow. The 6th and 7th Book of Moses get involved. Long Lost Friend, of course, get involved.
So the intermixing, I mean, it's such an American thing to do. Like, we're just basically a blender, a cultural blender.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, like that is almost a defining characteristic of magic and religion and magico-religious practices globally, broadly. I mean, what is the PGM, if not that? So
it's PGM, it's colonizers fucking up a local religion.
You heard it right here, folks, on the Arnemancy podcast. I mean, but I think this remixing, this is for contemporary practitioners and Americans in particular. I think one of the things that we've struggled with since, really I think we've been aware of it for not that long, is, that this tension between what is cultural remixing, what is this bricolage, and when is it cultural appropriation? Because that definitely also happens, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I just had to write a whole thing on core shamanism, and I was like, oh, yeah. Yeah. That was my face.
Yeah. I mean, how do you even, I don't know. I don't even know how to answer the question of cultural appropriation. It totally feels like one of those, you know it when you see it sort of things, like pornography. How do you tell when it's happening?
Yeah, no, that's not wrong, I think, in some ways. I think, one of the things that's been really helpful for me in sort of trying to parse that, especially in my own practice, is looking at who's in a position of power culturally. How did that happen? Like, what were the avenues that led to that? And how are those dynamics functioning historically, and how are they functioning today? And so all of us, we have multiple stations of relative power, right? So as magical practitioners, both of us have less power than, religiously speaking, than folks who don't practice magic, or practice just a normal, wholesome, all-American.
Like they go to an Anglican church. They have Lutheran potlucks or whatever.
Yeah.
They eat hot dish.
Which are honestly magical as all get out to me. But, basically. I mean,
you can't say that to them.
No, you can't. But I think it very loudly sometimes.
I did.
Lovingly.
Oh man, I went to a birthday party a couple days before my birthday, or a week before my birthday. And it was a friend of mine who is studying to be Anglican priest or deacon or something like that.
Yeah. Everybody
there was church people. Like, it was all his church friends. And a bunch of them were really, really intelligent, I told one of them about theurgy and where the word came from and the connection between magic and miracles and all this stuff. And he just sort of sat there and gaped at me and was like, what? And he didn't like that. And then another one brought up Gnostics, and I asked some questions, and my friend was like, oh, no, don't talk to Eric about the Gnostics. He knows too much. Like, shit.
I love it. And then you were like, wait till you come to my birthday party.
I invited all of them and none of them showed up.
Oh man, next year I'm getting a plane ticket. It's going to be a thing.
All right. I'll make sure that the Anglicans are there.
Oh, please. I mean, honestly, one of the so I was raised like militant atheist, right? And and this was I don't think my dad was Dawkins-esque, but he was definitely of that ilk, that generation. And that was how I was raised. I I would say I was raised militant atheist. And people get really uncomfortable with that description, but I was like, I don't know. You described to me militant anything, and that's what it was. So as a teenager, I realized it was just another dogma, and I kind of gave that up and fell into the sort of sloppy agnostic, whatever thing that most Gen X's fell into at that time.
Yeah.
But
I remember that.
Yeah. But one of the things that I've been really grateful about in terms of studying and learning about magic and the history of magic and the history of magic in the US is that it's made me much more tender-hearted towards dominant religious movements too. My in-laws are mostly Catholic, and I adore that aspect of their lives, and I love hearing them tell me about it. And I secretly, my poor husband, I think he worries that I'm gonna go convert, and I was like, is that a no? I can't, because I kind of want to.
Do you get free holy water? Is that a?
I feel weird about. I mean, I know it's fine, but I would still ask. I would want to be honest.
If you become Catholic, if you convert, you get free holy water. You can make friends with a priest who can bless all your Solomonic stuff. I know. There's all this great Catholic magic.
I know.
Magic and then, circles.
I could be the next Hilda von Bingen and just go off the deep end, and then imagine that podcast.
Oh man, I am ready for that one. I want to hear your visions of the crystal castles.
Right?
What was it? Yeah.
That would be rad. So anyway, I mean, but so I'm magicalizing religions, which is really probably deeply offensive to most of them. But like, but seriously, it's made me appreciate that as a cultural form more than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate it too. It was really fascinating listening to Anglicans discussing the theology of their own religion and sort of trying to figure out, because they had this great conversation about like trying to figure out if they are heretics or what the meaning of heresy is in Anglicanism. Like, you know, they would bring up something and be like, yeah, but if you talk to anybody in the church, like they totally are going to believe this because they don't know it's a heresy. Does that mean it's bad? Does it mean they're going to hell? And then some of them were like, you know, I'm kind of a universalist, and like just this, the progress of listening to them talk about their religion was really fascinating to me.
I love that.
I do too, and I honestly, having that sort of even you know, I mean, I consider myself a pagan and a hermeticist, but it is really, really difficult for me to cling to any sort of dogma with that level of certainty.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think some uncertainty is a good guard against zealotry. It's probably a good thing.
That's what I'm going to call this episode. Heather guards us against zealotry with her new podcast, Magic in the United States.
Also, grace is subjective.
Yes. Also, grace is subjective.
This is where I do my armpit farting sounds. Just
right.
to like make it extra, which I don't know how to do. I've never been able to do.
I might have a button for that. You never mastered that back in junior high? Oh man, middle school. I don't know you.
It's an arcanum I have yet to understand.
I suspect it's never too late.
I'm gonna try. Like seriously, like I'm gonna get my teenage son.
I mean, I haven't tried in a
me.
really long time. I'm not sure it's a skill that I've kept up.
If I'm able to do it, I'll sound record it for you on my phone and send it.
Thanks. I'll absolutely include that in the podcast.
Excellent.
Okay, so we're going to be having a little sample of magic in the United States. Can you tell us about what we're sampling a little bit? Do we know? God. We know. Did we talk about?
No, I was going to say, which one did you want?
Well, I was thinking the powwow one. The one with the scandal.
Yeah, no, totally. Do that one.
So what if you were going to entice people to listen to it? What would you say? Okay. Imagine there's really dramatic music, like in a world without, I don't know.
Telephones. Wait, no, there were telephones.
In a world without telephones.
Except I think there were. This is 1928. In a world without broadband.
There was no television. There was no television yet. Television wasn't until the 40s. In a world without television.
Yes. So you have a powwower, Nelson Raymeyer, who is your friendly neighborhood powwower. So he does healings. He helps people through tough medical problems, probably farm issues, veterinary problems, well loved by his community. And basically Thanksgiving, his body is discovered in his home and it's been partially burned. His house looks kind of messed up, like it was been ransacked. And just a couple of days later, they arrest three men. Well, two men and a boy, a man and an 18-year-old and a 14-year-old. And they have a trial for his murder. Takes 3 days to convict them. The other men were powwowers also. And the reason why we remember this is because the media circus that happened around that trial, like, almost destroyed powwow. It almost eliminated it from the world.
Wow.
Because it was so devastating, and powwowers went underground like hard after that trial. So it's true crime.
That's exciting. Everybody loves true crime. This is going to be good for everybody's
It's true
numbers.
crime and folk magic.
Wow. Okay. True crime and folk magic. That sounds, I mean, I know a little bit of that story, and it's a fascinating one, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it fits into the context. And I hope that at the end of the episode, you have good news. Like, and now there are powwowers in every 50 state. every one of the 50 states.
And there's probably more people who have copies of Dan Harm's translation of The Long Lost Friend thanks to that episode.
Oh man, I love that translation.
It's my favorite.
Mine too. I wish it was pocket sized. I really wish it was pocket sized.
I just curl
The
up
Long
with
Lost
his
Friend,
end
it's
notes.
supposed
I'm
to
not
be
even
pocket.
kidding.
You're supposed to be able to. Yeah. Maybe he'll release a pocket sized version because you're supposed to be able to carry it with you everywhere.
I mean, okay. Get the Dan Harms, then get a pocket version without Dan Harm's amazing endnotes.
Okay, that's what everybody has to do.
Yeah, but the endnotes, oh my God, chef's kiss, so good.
Okay, well, I will make sure that I don't know how we're going to do it. It's either going to be a clip or we're going to do an episode swap, but whatever happens next, maybe there will be like a nice beep right here.
Beep. Powwow is a beloved healing tradition with deep roots in Pennsylvania Dutch communities. But the fact that there are contemporary powwow practitioners at all is, in a lot of ways, kind of a miracle. Because even though powwow used to be really common, something happened nearly 100 years ago that changed the practice forever. The murder of powwower Nelson D. Rehmeyer.
That one incident in that tiny little section of Pennsylvania and that tiny little dot on Earth almost was the destruction of the whole tradition. Because by the time the 50s and 60s rolled around, everybody just thought powwow was dead.
Nelson Rehmeyer is an interesting character because I don't know that his life was ever really subject to any form of scrutiny until after he died.
He was, just friendly and kind, and that's who he was.
I'm Heather Freeman, and this is Magic in the United States. Today's episode, the murder of Nelson D. Rehmeyer. In this episode, I'll tell you why powwower Nelson Rehmeyer was brutally murdered in his home, how the trial of his killers became a media circus that nearly destroyed powwow, and how this uniquely American folk healing tradition managed to survive and is now thriving around the world to this day. This is Magic in the United States. I'm Heather Freeman. In 1928, in southeastern Pennsylvania, Nelson Rehmeyer was 60 years old and was well regarded in his quiet Pennsylvania Dutch community. He mostly kept to himself, tending his farm.
He was a potato farmer in North Hopewell Township, York County. He had a modest 45-acre farm. He raised corn, potatoes, apples, chickens, didn't have a lot of livestock.
That's Patrick Dunmeyer. He's director of the Pennsylvania German Cultural Heritage Center in Kutztown University. It's a folklife museum and research center specializing in Pennsylvania Dutch culture.
Nelson Rehmeyer grew up in a mixed cultural background.
The Pennsylvania Dutch lived in farming communities of German immigrants that were largely insulated from the rest of American society. They spoke German, and they came to Pennsylvania seeking religious freedom. These were devout Christians who'd been marginalized or persecuted in their home countries.
They considered themselves Americans, but many aspects of their culture gave them some degree of insulation from some of the normative effects of American culture at large. And of course, part of that is the fact that Pennsylvania Dutch people historically and presently are bilingual.
Because the Pennsylvania Dutch were also geographically isolated and conventional medical care was often far out of reach, they developed their own folk healing practices, powwow. And Rehmeyer was a well-known practitioner in his community. Now, powwowers were the urgent care clinics of their day, which meant people were showing up at all hours looking for all kinds of help from healing gunshot wounds to soothing screaming babies. And as a powwower, Rehmeyer helped his community by using ritualized biblical prayers and healing charms, like the one you heard at the beginning of this episode. So Rehmeyer moved out of his wife's house and down the road, so his family wouldn't be bothered by so many visitors.
Let's talk about some other stuff too.
Okay.
So I listened to, I think I've only heard the first two episodes so far because the powwow one is the third or fourth.
It's the third one. Yeah.
One of the episodes you covered like some really modern stuff. You covered Podsnet and kind of like how paganism started spreading through BBSs and all that kind of stuff. Are you going to continue on that trek and sort of look at how modern magic and modern paganism spreads even more? Like, are you going to get into Usenet? Are you going to get into like Discord and podcasts and like all the weird shit we're doing now?
Oh yeah. No. So, I mean, this is my poor production team and humanities advisors. Like, nobody cares about digital magic other than you, Freeman. And I was like, shut up.
That's so not
Eric
true.
Arneson
There are
cares.
3 of us.
There's 3 of us, maybe 4. You,
Maybe 4.
me, Trey, Nick.
Yeah.
No, I know somebody, Selena Kyle, who that's a pseudonym, obviously, but
Selena Kyle. That's Catwoman. You know.
Catwoman, yes, and that's not their real name, but they're also deeply invested in this. So
if they're real.
They are. I've had coffee with them in person in real life. unless that was a cyber vision or something. Anyway,
but there are more,
yes.
right? Like I'm part of the Green Mushroom Project, which is this sort
I'm on
of
there too.
like
yeah.
I mean, there's tons of stuff going on.
Yeah, there's tons.
It's mostly underground. It's the sort of, I don't know.
Well, and
I'm
actually,
not sure.
I was just at a culture in October, and I gave a talk there about bioregionalism and digital technology, actually, and there was there was many sessions actually on digital practice and in a culture. So like Jeff Howard and Cavan McLaughlin, who are all over in the UK, like they're like super deep into this. So there's a lot of people doing it, and basically the last episode of season 3, and I'm only making this the last episode because crap changes so fast. I want to just focus in on contemporary practitioners who are also digital technologists in some way, doing new and interesting things like, like the Cythemius and like your LED candles and like whatever Nick Chappelle is up to and whatever Trey Henry's up to and all those things. So I think there's so many interesting experiments happening in the digital, and it speaks volumes to both the inherent creativity of magic, but also the inherent creativity of technologists. And I love that combination. And one of the episodes is also going to be about magical practices and the arts in the United States. And there's so much there too.
How are you even going to start?
Right? Like, right?
Yeah,
right.
That's like almost, that's too big a topic.
It's too big a topic, which I'm like,
yeah.
Terrified of that one because it's going to just be too big a topic. But I feel like ending the whole series with digital technology, I think will be a really nice way to be like, this is still a living thing. It's still changing. It's as contemporary as anything else and as ancient as we pretend it is.
Yeah. The idea of magic and the arts in the United States, like the number of musicians I know who are also practitioners and mixing magic and music. I mean, just, like
architecture.
I
know.
I mean, everybody's seen Ghostbusters, which is actually a great example of that sort of, but I mean, architecture, dance, painting, just visual arts.
Yeah. I mean, fortunately, I'm limiting it to the United States, but even then, it's like I feel like there's easily a whole episode about the impact of Robert Johnson, like on so much. So,
oh man,
I know.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much stuff to cover. Do you know how many seasons are you going to do? Like, is the next season already? Do you have a deal for I don't know how it works. Do you you have to do a grant each season? Yeah,
kind of. I mean, so we're funded for 3 seasons, and they're going to be 6 months apart.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So there's going to be another season in April, May, and then another one October, November. And actually, like PRX is already like, hey, you're going to hustle for more grants, and I was like, I don't know what grants there are. Like, I'm not sure I'd be able to convince other granting agencies to keep this going.
You got to try.
I'll try. There's so much to do. So yeah, I'll try, but we're definitely funded for 3 seasons total. And we're basically going to start cranking on season 2, like almost as soon as the season ends.
That's amazing. That's really, really exciting. I'm so excited for you. I think when you first told me that you got the grant, I didn't realize that it was more than just a short run. So that's awesome.
And that it was going to sound as good because of my
brand new microphone.
my editor and
your editor,
my sound designer and my producer and my associate producer.
Man, that's really cool. Yeah. Okay, I don't want you to spoil the topic, but like, what are some other subjects that you're going to hit that maybe people wouldn't be expecting? Like, what are some?
Well, it's funny because it keeps coming up in season 1 because there's no way to talk about American magical practice without it. But we are going to have an episode, probably several episodes, that address the complexity of perceptions of Native American religious and spiritual practices as it intersects with magic, especially after the counterculture movement and New Age theosophy, New Thought. Like, there's no way to like untangle that, and so we're just going to go ahead and dive in. And there's probably going to be actually a couple episodes that sort of we're trying to find a couple key stories to tell and to sort of get into that complex. We're just finishing up the episode on with Jaewon Koo and Jennifer Kim about Korean American magical practices among and spiritual practices among Gen X and millennials. And that episode is actually a huge challenge to research for a lot of reasons. But I kind of like, I secretly want to come back and do one about Hmong American folk practices. And part of that is because I live in Charlotte. We have a really big Hmong community here. But that's something I really don't know much about. And I feel like, and that's another one of those episodes. Yeah, it's not magic. It's a folk practice. But I think it illuminates a great deal about what happens to immigrant communities, particularly how they get placed in the United States and how they have to choose a religion in that immigration process. It's really kind of fascinating.
I think, though, we also established early in the episode that folk practices are magic from some point of view.
Yeah.
I mean, depending. Okay, hold on. I want to go back to that. It's been bubbling in the back of my head.
Yeah.
So I think that one of the problems with defining magic is that in some sense it is a sort of like social practice or an element of social practice. And then in the other sense, people think of magic as a medium through which supernatural effects can occur, right? Or something like that, right? It's not necessarily always referring to the same thing.
Yes, correct.
Right? So that can really get in the way of defining it.
If you circle back high level and you say, okay, let's look at the definition of magic for non-magical practitioners who are talking to other non-magical practitioners. All of a sudden, the complexity of that gets collapsed, and it's things that are not religion. So it's a dumping ground, as sort of Thorne Mooney put it in the first episode.
Oh, shit.
So religion is a political category. It's a political category in the United States.
It is. Okay.
And so if we actually want to talk about what people do, what their practices are, what the lived thing is, then we start getting to more interesting things. But it also makes the answers more complicated in terms of what's religion, what's magic, what's spirituality, what's folk healing.
Yeah.
But that's where the interesting stuff is, I think.
I don't know that I ever would have, I didn't really consider like the Korean American religious practices and stuff. Like that makes a lot of sense. And then for the Native American stuff like that, there's such a breadth of, I mean, there's so many different cultures that are going to be, you're going to be looking at. Like, are you going to talk to like Southwest?
I mean, that's it's the same problem as sort of trying to talk about like if I were going to try to do initially that the last episode was going to be about millennial and Gen X Asian Americans online. Like that was my narrow sort of focus. The content ended up shifting it. Right. There's no monolithic, Native American religion. Right. So that's right. I think that episode and it's probably going to have to be 2 or 3 episodes. There's so much to unpack there. And honestly, for most generalist audiences, I don't know that we're going to be able to tuck into actual practices too deeply because we're going to be spending so much time disentangling it from New Age.
Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, there is kind of a monolithic level of cultural appropriation of Native American stuff by like the New Age community.
Yeah. So
sure.
I mean, that's kind of, I mean,
Where
honestly,
everything gets mixed together. Yeah.
yeah. And I think that's going to be basically the heart of it. And then there's also sort of the media representation, which still happens today, you know, and there's real, like, there's real world harm done to Indigenous communities through some of these representations. And so,
for sure.
you know, we're going to try to take a stab at like disentangling those things a little bit. At the same time, like, you know, on the flip side of me is like, well, we got to do an episode about like Thelema, or an episode about chaos magic, or about like all the people doing drawing spirits into crystals, because like that I feel like is its own cool thing. Like, or
I mean, I think
Rufus Opus burning down his house. I don't know.
Right. I mean, I think doing an episode about Thelema would be really important, because that has to do, you know, I mean, you're going to be touching on a lot of stuff there, or even just like the intersection of magical practice and like the far right movement.
Yeah.
Which is gross, but it's there. It's everywhere.
Oh, I know. I mean, I've been avoiding thinking about an episode on heathenism for that reason, because largely because I know so many practitioners who are like extremely socially progressive and have these amazing devotional practices to Norse deities. And it's like, I don't want to be one more podcast that like talks about like all the, can I say asshats? Is that a thing I can say?
I've been using all sorts of bad words. You can use whatever bad word you want.
Jerks. I want to talk about those jerks.
You already said asshats. You can say asshats again. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those. I mean, I guess you could do an episode focusing on just the good side of it too, like just being like.
We're talking about complexity. You know, it's like I think like the thing. So the people who are practitioners who come on these episodes, my first obligation is to them, and to honor and respect them and their practices however they see it, and present that in its own light, in its own context, and just leave it.
Yeah.
And I've been safe, you know, this first season in a lot of ways with that. If I were going to have an episode where like, I don't know, like, yeah, it can get really tricky pretty quickly. So I am curating for sure. Like there's no way not to.
Can I pitch an episode idea?
Yeah.
To you? Do you think maybe when you come out to Portland for my birthday next year, why don't you do an episode about how Portland is this amazing city full of weird magicians and occultists and witches and tarot people and stuff?
Could I do like a residency of like, is there like a place where I could do a residency and just like hang out and see what weird stuff is happening out in Portland?
I'm sure we could find a place for that. Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, you have a grant.
I know. I mean, yeah, like, I mean, well, that's another thing is like thinking about like, I don't really know if there's like particular cities or towns that are like, they have this weird burgeoning occult scene, which is like its own crazy egregore and blah, blah, blah. Because
I'm not sure. I do know that, you know, I went to a bunch of cities last year. And none of them really had the same feel, but I assume that there are some out there that have really good, you know, magical scenes, occult scenes. Like I'm sure New Orleans.
But I feel like, you know,
maybe LA.
We don't talk with each other in like those meet spaces. Like we don't really find each other unless like you're in New York and there's Catland, and I guess Catland is closing or whatever. Like we have here in Charlotte, like an occult salon that's like five people.
Catland is closing?
Okay, I'm probably spreading disinfo. I don't know. Ask the Discord.
Okay, I'll just ask.
I could text somebody right now midstream and be like, "Is Catland?"
No. That's cool. Let's just spread the disinfo.
Hey, guess what? You get to edit this.
Yay!
You can bleep where I said asshat.
I'm gonna bleep where I said asshat, and then where you said asshat. I'm gonna make it really loud.
Excellent. You're welcome.
Well, okay, so this has been really good. Let's just skip to the end part where I'm like, so how can people find your stuff on the internet or wherever?
Yes. So you can go to magicintheunitedstates.com. I know it's a horribly long URL, rife with potentials for misspellings, but you're bound to find it and not something scurrilous.
Who is going to misspell magic or United States? Oh, wait, is it magic with a K?
No, it's not. See, exactly. It's MAGIC in the United States. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
Got it. MagicIntheUnitedStates.com.
Yeah.
And I assume it's also featured on PRX.
Yes, PRX. And it's, we have an Instagram page, the Facebook page. I have my own TikTok because I can't, I'm like, no, I'm not making another.
Are you doing the dances? Are you doing the TikTok dances?
I wish the audio world could see the face I'm giving you right now, because I'm just like, oh God. I look, there's two gay farmers I love watching on TikTok, and really it just makes me want to be a gay farmer. But otherwise TikTok I don't understand.
Okay, there'll be links for all of that stuff in the show notes, so you can go watch Heather on TikTok. I have no idea what she's doing over there.
It's literally it's just audiograms of podcast episodes where I make some really crappy graphics, and then I'm like, here, listen
that's
to the
what I've been
soundbite.
doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, thank you. This was excellent. I'm really looking forward to learning who really killed the
Nelson Ray Meyer.
Mr. Meyer.
Yes, Mr. Meyer.
Yeah, Nelson Ray Meyer. And, if you're listening to this, make sure you also listen to at least one episode of Magic in the United States, hosted by Professor Heather Freeman.
Okay, thank you so much for having me, Eric, and thank you again.
This has been another episode of the Arnemancy Podcast. Thank you for joining me. I have been your host, Reverend Eric. You can find Arnemancy online at arnemancy.com, and you can subscribe to this podcast anywhere podcasts are found. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting the Arnemancy Project for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/Arnemancy.